Welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey Moss, your host and president of our management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. The Igniting Impact podcast offers an opportunity to share the daily impact of our clients and partners on the world. And this year, we explored the theme of change, how it shows up in our systems, in our work, in our communities, and in ourselves. Today, we are doing our season finale, and I'm very excited to be joined by two public knowledge colleagues, Will Hornsby, who's the Senior Vice President of Delivery, and Kassie Graham, our Senior Vice President of Business Development. Thank you both for being here today. You've both served as guests on earlier episodes, but today's conversation is going to take a little bit of a different angle. We're going to step back and reflect on what this year taught us about leading through change, both on our podcast guests and our podcast episodes, as well as ourselves as leaders of a company. So since you've already introduced yourself in prior episodes, let's take a little different look at your current role with just some warm-up questions, getting to know you a little bit. Kassie, I'll start with you. If you could share with our audience, what is your favorite part of your role at Public Knowledge, and what is the most challenging part?
Well, I think my favorite part, I know my favorite part of this role is solving problems. It's one of the things that has really brought me to management consulting, and it's also what has kept me here for such a long time, 14 and a half years. And really, solving problems is fun because it really combines the mental stimulation and emotional reward with it, but it also combines that with social connection that's required to solve problems. It all comes together to satisfy my innate curiosity and need for mastery, even if it's just for a moment, so I can move on to the next thing. But I also would say the most challenging part is solving problems. It's really difficult. It can be time consuming, and the reward, the payoff is really wonderful because it keeps me engaged. It's also hard. What we do is hard.
And hard when it's problems that we haven't solved before, most likely, and are having a hard time solving them. Yeah.
Yes.
I love it. I love that it's the same thing. Bill, what about you? What's your favorite part and the most challenging part?
My favorite part is I get a lot of satisfaction when we're able to put our management consultants in a position to do work that they're passionate about, that they're excited about. With the role that I'm in now, that's something that I take very seriously. And I think when we're able to do that, it's great because, it's good for our management consultants, but it's good for our clients because those are normally the times that something special is happening, where we're really seeing impact, where there's really a difference. So that's what I'm finding myself as, where I really get a lot of satisfaction in my current role. The most challenging thing about my role is trying to balance the multiple and varied demands on my time each day and looking and seeing my peers and colleagues having some of the same struggles.
Yeah.
And when I think about this year, when I think about 2025, it almost feels compounded by uncertainty, some of the instability, and we're seeing the challenges that our clients are dealing with and feeling that, in kind of the day-to-day work and trying to think about personally, how do I address that better and how do I try to help my colleagues do that?
Yeah. Well, you're leading exactly to where we're headed today. Thank you both for sharing that. And I'm really glad that the biggest challenge wasn't me for you. So I didn't pay them off, I swear. So thank you. When I was writing the question, I had a moment of like, do I want to ask this? So let's talk about the shifts that none of us expected this year. And oh my gosh, Will, you're right on that there were many. So change is constant, and it's been constant, right, for the last 5 or 6 years. But this year was a little unique. And this season, right, we talked about change, and we're seeing things, right, like industry shifts, the shifting federal world and landscape, workforce changes, right, just in the day-to-day. I mean, we talked about one this morning, but the people that we're managing and that are on our team are changing, as well as client priorities, right? Which are changing and evolving very quickly, right? As they react to all the changes around them. So looking back at the last year, where did the pace or the pattern of our work shift in ways that you did not anticipate coming into 2025?
Yeah, when, thinking back across 2025, and it was early in the year, and I did not anticipate the experience of having the large number of colleagues in human services finding themselves in vulnerable positions regarding job security, in a position where having to think about possibly making a job change and it may not be of their choosing, and of having very real hard discussions with people that are being challenged, and that being kind of a backdrop of what's going on. And then when you think about during the year, really seeing a slowing around funding decisions being made by public agencies, where, it's impacting the pace of starting a project or pushing a current project further because of, not being sure about funding sources or being tighter around making those decisions. And all of this has presented, real challenges this year, and has framed it to be a challenging, hard year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Kassie, what about you?
Yeah, and I had something similar as well, kind of on the front end. And while the breadth of the change wasn't really what I was expecting, we all expected it, right? There's just a massive change in administrative priorities, administrative ideals, and that sort of thing. So it's not like that was the surprise, but it was the volume and how swift it was, I think. And then I'll just speak for myself. I thought, okay, well, that was done. That was big, bigger than I expected. And so then now we'll move into the next normal. And it just has not happened, right? We're still seeing slow decisions. Everything is just a slower pace, which is kind of not at all what I expected. I thought with how fast it was, I thought then this kind of whatever it would be settled faster. And so I think that still hits me, and how long it's taking for our industries to really orient themselves around these changes. And then with the government shutdown and kind of the impact of that, it just keeps slowing and slowing and
Well, and there's just chaos. It's like, how can we stay? How long can we stay in this chaos? I think it's before people lose it.
yeah. I mean, you would think that, I mean, ideally out of chaos comes decision making, in which then will re-accelerate into the piece,
Yeah.
but it's not happening in a way that I ever expected.
No, not at all. How did those surprises affect your teams, our clients, or their decision making?
Everyone's chomping at the bit to get working and to get going, right? Like we have we have these really amazing projects and this amazing work that we're ready to have this impact, and it's, they're big, exciting things for us that we're just waiting to get going, because there's not been anyone at the federal level to say yes, bless, this is ready to go forward. So I think that's really, and the same thing from the business development side, is we're just chomping at the bit to get going.
I think it's forced all of us to like adapt time frames, adapt our plans, and it's also forcing us to really listen, to really try to understand what's happening, to understand what the client's challenges, their concerns, their problems are, so that even with the slowdown that Cassie's describing, that we're still finding ourselves in situations of having to try to really be aware and think about what are solutions for right now, and what are things that can happen right now, but then what are the things that we need to be thinking about coming up, and setting everyone up for success moving forward.
Yeah, in the future when it changes again, because it's going to change again, right? And we don't know when or how or what that will be exactly, but how do we remain ready to address that with our clients then? All right. Well, thank you guys. Let's go ahead and jump into our season. So this was a season of change. And every time I say that, I have the season of love from Rent stuck in my head. I want to break out into song. So what we want to walk through is just I'm going to do a quick overview of our guests and the episodes, and then a couple questions for you guys on each of them to kind of hear what were the highlights, what were the lessons that you learned from listening to our guests, so that we kind of have a good summary of what we can bring forward from the learnings from this season. So, episode 1 were our colleagues from PK, Bree Thompson, and Naomi Snodgrass. And our focus in episode 1 was really about change and how leaders navigate change in a VUCA environment, looking at OCM, looking at ProSci, looking at the ADKAR model. But how do we support people through transitions? So, Will, I'm going to start with you, but kind of what stood out from their discussion on leading change for you?
The points that stood out to me is, that we do not have organization change without individual change. Both of you are going to roll your eyes, but I'm going to make a Nick Saban reference here. And
Is this a sports reference?
but there was discussion about the importance of encouraging failure, not playing the blame game. And, there's a quote where Nick Saban says, I don't want to waste a failure. And that's just like a mindset as opposed to going negative and punishing, really thinking, what can we learn and how can we do this better in the future?
May have finally given Stacey a reason to remember Nick Saban. He's actually shared this with me before, and now I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. I like this guy. I still don't remember the team or anything, but I do remember that guy and that quote.
Yeah. And this one is hard for me, but that disagreement should be encouraged. And I think, getting more comfortable with that and being able to navigate that in either meetings or in interactions. And it's kind of akin to, frankly, the failure issue
Yeah,
of being open to, wait a minute, there are other ways to look at this and to open yourself up to that.
love it. Cassie, what do you think was the most relevant insight from episode 1 for teams that are managing uncertainty?
The one that really resonated with me the most was kind of creating this cadence for what I think someone referred to as shared sense making. So to make sense of all of the discombobulated information that seems to be the chaos that we were talking about. And so when we really listen broadly and stress test those assumptions and then really communicate openly, it seems like uncertainty becomes a way to be agile. And it's an invitation to be agile and not paralyzed through all of that.
Yeah. So test and test quickly. Yeah.
Yes. And so both Naomi and Brie both talked about this, about leaning into different change styles as well, right? So as we're kind of talking about agility, the part that, and we'll just mention it about the invite disagreement, is that everybody needs to lean on somebody that is caught in a different part of change. And the reason is because it helps ground for those of us who change quickly, not always, but in some cases, understanding why the person who is slow to adopt change, kind of what's behind it and how it really helps each other through it. And really what that does, it makes the process sustainable, which ultimately what we're looking for is for the change to stick.
Yeah.
And so when you have all sides of it, it's more likely to sustain and stay. I also had a personal insight about this. And I do love change, I mentioned that, but I was gathering input from my annual review. This is my time. And it really aligns with my area for growth, which is to continue to check in with people regularly and understand their perspective so that we can do this together, right? So that I am bringing them along and they are also bringing me along in their changes that I may or may not know. And so it really just creates buy-in, which is something that I am, consistently working to work through that communication. And as leaders, that's what we're responsible for. We don't just tell people what to do. We are responsible for helping influence and inspire.
Let's take a look at episode 2. Episode 2, we had Phyllis Nance from Alameda County. We had Kathy Sokolik, who is a retired PK employee team member, and Matt Sauter. And the focus was how intentional training strengthens child support programs, both staff culture and family-centered service delivery. Kassie, could you share with our audience what takeaways from this conversation felt kind of most practical?
Yeah, it's really about treating conversations as collaborative problem solving. It doesn't really matter what industry that you were talking about. It just so happens that we were talking to Phyllis with child support and Kathy and Matt who represent our child support work. But I think it really is applicable to everything that we do when we engage as humans, which is really listen first, speak with purpose, and then on the flip side is if you don't hear something that you want to hear, manage your emotions and then turn that conflict into progress. So that was a big takeaway for me.
Yeah. Will, what insight connects with what you see in the field, in the delivery work?
I thought the discussion was really interesting about the evolution of the child support program, moving from this punitive, collection focused effort to a shift to services. I actually thought it was poignant when Matt talked about the question of, am I helping or hurting in doing this work? You know, even and I find this really interesting, just the use of language, the use of terms and how that changes over time. And because like my first job in human services was as a child support worker. And at that time we talked about AP, absent parents, and just thinking about the move from that to talking about customers, and then they talked about parents
Yeah.
and valuing the efforts to strengthen a family and that being everyone that's involved. That's so positive, particularly when I think about like a number of years ago when I started, and it was so collections based, enforcement based, and to just think about that progression.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just thinking about you highlighting that the difference in term between, and I know it's evolved since then, so hopefully nobody holds this against me, but from the absent parent from when you were working, in the program to now the parent, which is custodial parent and non-custodial parent, right? And nowhere is absentee assumed in that at all. And I think that's pretty interesting just to see again, whatever term that they're using now, I think is even more inclusive of where people stand and all the variables that are in that.
Totally. All right. Well, we're going to take a big shift now into episode 3, going from talking about families to talking about procurement. So, our guest in episode 3 was one of our partners, Dustin Lanier from Civic Initiatives. And the focus was on how procurement becomes strategic, right? When agencies move from more of a compliance, and this is procurement agencies in particular, where they're focused on more of a compliance focus to outcome or partnership driven approaches. So, Will, what stood out to you about his approach to strategic procurement?
I really like how Dustin talks about, thinking about procurement being like an expression of the program. Compliance is not the end goal of what's happening here. Sourcing events or opportunity to express project goals. I mean, there's such a shift for some folks around that thinking and what's possible. He talked about procurement serving as an opportunity for competitive proof of concept, of really being able to use that as an opportunity for programs to find business partners that are aligned with their goals, that are trying to get to that outcome that you're looking for. It was so much more of thinking about really how procurement plays a role in ending up with trying to serve families better and trying to be at a much better place, as opposed to checking the box, meeting its requirements around something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what stood out to me.
Yeah. Kassie, are there any ideas that Dustin shared that you feel like agencies really need to apply or use more often in their procurement work?
Yeah, a lot. Being one of the procurement nerds, and this is where I've spent the majority of my public knowledge career. I obviously listen very closely, and of course know Dustin, so I love always having these conversations. But to Will's point, is Dustin really says stop selling outputs and start owning outcomes, and then really tying exactly what Will said, tying that procurement to their business goals. That's when that agent or organization, especially at a central procurement office, is going to become indispensable, right? So there's just an inherent tension in most of those agencies between kind of, hey, we're responsible for risk mitigation, we're responsible for compliance, we want to keep our money where it belongs and keep, satisfaction as high as we can with a low risk, right?
Yeah.
And so when we take that when an agency takes that kind of perspective, it sets up a different structure that does then become really compliance based, which isn't always going to meet the needs of, I mean, it meets the basic needs, but not the intent and the outcomes that are looking for. And so I think in addition to kind of partnering with those agencies and helping improve for outcomes, there's another really amazing point that came out of this, which is that agencies, and I think this is both sides. I know that the conversation was really about the procurement agency, but I think it's on both sides of the perspective when they're coming together, but they should both move from being transactional to transformational. And really the ways that Dustin really highlighted, I 100% agree with, which is become transparent, be really transparent. And I know that's hard because you can't, it's a fine line.
It's a line. It's not hard. It's just a line. Yeah. Like what can you be transparent on and what can you not? Yeah.
And you can be transparent about what you can't be transparent about. And you can,
exactly.
And that's great. And so I think being really, really responsible in that, but also becoming outcome focused. We've already talked about that, but also finding ways to be agile and then collaborative. And here's the thing that I hear most of, because we oftentimes represent the kind of those central procurement offices customer, is become client centric, right? Is really, how can I help you? Which is the theme of the previous episodes, just in a different tilt, which is how can I help you succeed? What is it that I need to do with what I know about rules, regs, and risk mitigation? There's one more thing that I do want to highlight, which is the idea of building trust through radical transparency. I mean, we just talked about this. What can I say? What can I say? But it means that agencies can really earn these long-term partnerships when they share, and this is about like the outcome too, when they share what's not working for them. Right. And this goes back to the Nick Saban, and it's going to come up again in another thing that I want to highlight on another episode, which is like, you have to learn from failures. And so the procurement office is equally as kind of notable in this ability to review and share. We tried something. We tried invitation to negotiate, and it didn't work. And it was the same amount of work. It was just at a different point of it, and it's still hard to enforce. As just one example.
All right. Episode 4 was with Julie Breedlove and Colin Watkins, and we talked about leading people-centered Medicaid modernization projects and how do we help teams adapt during continuous system change, because our Medicaid partners and agencies are really looking at not just a one-time modernization anymore, but really a constant system change, right? How do we plug in and pull out and then plug in and pull out over time? Will, what resonated with you most from their modernization system experiences?
The whole theme around that, it's people driving the change and not the technology itself. And that I think that's so interesting in terms of thinking about that things succeed when the people, when the users, when the vendors, when the community, when the people that are connected are empowered, and that technology is like the tool, but it's not driving everything. Like the messages around adaptability, around the importance of leadership driving changes and transformation, were really strong through this, and that's what resonated the most with me.
Yeah, that's great. Kassie, that kind of connects to what I wanted to ask you about is kind of those leadership insights, right? Like, what of those translate well to other system work outside of the Medicaid modernizations?
Absolutely. So the leaders really need to take that and invest the time, energy, and resource into preparing people for those changes in technology. And to do this, you need to employ the other tactics that we spent time on during this episode, which is, resistance management, empowering your other leaders, right? So good leaders empower leadership at all levels and lean into it, right? It's just not just saying, "Hey, I dubbed thee a leader." It's okay, you are leading this and I'm going to lean into you here because I'm focused over here. And then also really communication, communication, communication. And the other piece that both Colin and Julie touch on that I think is really important for leaders is the courage to make hard decisions. I think that is really, you're not always going to get it right, but it takes courage to make those difficult ones.
And you're never going to make everyone happy no matter what decision you make. So it's getting
Yes.
comfortable with and having the courage to make a decision when yes, some people may be happy with it, but some people may not. And you're going to have to manage that.
Yeah.
It's good. All right, episode 5, and we're more than halfway through the season at this point, was Naomi Snodgrass and Ron Pent. And we talked there about early planning for systems projects, right? So alternatives analysis, visioning, strategic planning, and kind of a structured decision making and how they can shape long-term system modernization outcomes. Kassie, I know you've done this work as well and done that with Naomi and Ron. So kind of what stood out to you about the importance of early decisions in these projects?
I don't mean to oversimplify this or maybe state the obvious, but especially when we're talking about planning, right? That's inherent in the question about early decisions. But the importance of using the structures that we talk about in this episode are really the key components to the strategic leadership actions. And these are used to shape culture, they're used to shape the engagement, and then really it helps promote the long-term success. And so I really think that the process that you create as an organization can really elevate anyone into the category of what you would consider makes a good leader because they empower innovation and they create space for different voices and perspectives. And when you build that structure to do that, then actually it just elevates your leadership overall.
And living into it is easier, right? If you're setting that up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Will, what point do you think came up during episode 5 that connects to the challenges that you're seeing our clients or agencies and states face today?
Well, it kind of builds on what Kassie was talking about because, thinking about like the challenge having stakeholder alignment of, and then thinking about the work being done to build consensus to do the type of leadership that Kassie was talking about, but that then the importance of that, because if there's a leadership change, if with the election cycle, what has happened through that early work to carry you through, to carry the agency through that challenge. It also just stands out to me the importance of comparing options and, it's really pretty complex and of having to think about it being as informed as possible and making decisions that are taking as much as into consideration as possible to try to go, yeah, this is the right direction for us to move. And this is going to be in alignment with the type of system that we want to have in place.
Well, and you hit on something that's so important, and I've seen our clients get kind of stuck in before is if they don't do that and there is an administration change or a legislature change or, then they end up with the project failing or getting put on hold or getting delayed. And it trips them up later on, right? Because they don't have the good justification for why they made that decision and what the decision was and why it should stand regardless of administration or legislation.
and demonstration that they've gotten all the collective data out there, everything that they knew at the time, and everyone, more than just the one person or, the group of people that get changed with this administration change or whatever that is. But it's been out there for everyone that still remains to see, hear, discuss, evaluate, and understand. And there are components that even though, Bill is no longer here, we know what Bill said. And there are enough people that understand what Bill had to say and understand components of it. And it was put towards the plan, right? And so I think that it does last way beyond the actual people in the room.
Yeah. All right. Well, episode 6, I got to do with Abe Mendoza, one of our clients out of San Joaquin County. He was really fun to talk with. And we talked about how we can engage staff and how documenting real workflows and like redesigning processes can help strengthen a child support services office. And Will, I was wondering what you thought was kind of most compelling about kind of their staff-driven approach, right? So rather than kind of changing and redesigning processes for them, they asked the staff to be really involved in driving that.
Yeah, I just love the listening to the people who are working directly with the families. And uh, through that, that's emphasizing the family's needs. That's really trying to make sure that it's being addressed. And so that it's not like this effort that's just like focused on improving the business process, but it's thinking about really how are people experiencing this? What is this going to do to push things forward? I think that just so smart of thinking about frontline staff and of really seeking that input and then thinking about, how that helps have a more practical solution as opposed to something like what we were talking about with episode 5 is an approach or something that's unaligned, that's not going to really meet the needs of what you're wanting to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we look at kind of how do we do that to get the best and biggest improvements, Kassie, what part of Abe's strategy do you think might get them there or might get one of our clients there?
I think it was their family-centered lens as the governing strategy, and I think that really anchors their outcomes.
Yeah.
So in addition to the frontline staff on one side, you need to know why you're doing it. So when Abe talks about asking, what is the impact on the parents or how do we impact the parents when we make these changes? It really shifted the frontline workers' mindset from being one of internal convenience for themselves to the client experience and how do we improve that service delivery and service quality. And I really believe once you take that lens, it really drove how he engaged his frontline staff, saying, hey, you're the ones that meet with them the most. How can you impact our processes from their perspective? And then it helps narrow in on those easy wins that were really yielding the maximum results. I think that anyone looking to do this, I think that's a great way to do it. And then it also kind of through that identifies the communication gaps that need to be addressed. And then from there, which skills are missing and where we need to cross train so that there's continuity so that our families are not impacted by the change, whatever's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, Kassie, you're hitting on this, and I'm getting excited about it because it's so interesting. It's been the key to good change in every single project I've ever been involved in with any industry and any client, right? And it is tied into this kind of human-centered approach, which is no matter what agency we're talking about or what industry we're talking about, who is their ultimate user or client, right? So for child welfare, that's families. For child support, it's families, right? For Medicaid, it's people and families in the community and the community, right? For transportation, it's drivers on the roads. But if we think about that and we think about how all of that policy and work and processes drive it, right? I think I've just seen the best outcomes and improvements in any of the work that we've ever done with those clients when they're really focused on who's at the center of it, right? For child welfare, it's the kid. So if you're always thinking about the kid and the child at the center of that or the family at the center of that, we just make better decisions, right? And we get bigger improvements and we get better outcomes for everyone, including the workforce that's helping serve them, right? Because most of them are there for that reason anyhow. So, and in the transportation work that we've done, right? Thinking about how they redesign even something that seems so foreign from a person, right? Talking about how do we pay for our roads, but those projects that have been focused on who's using the road and how they might want to experience that and how they might want to pay for that, that's been the best projects we've ever worked on, right? Has been, and the best improvements has been focused on ultimately who are they serving.
Well, even in North Carolina, where we worked on procurement manuals, right? That how does that connect? Well, it absolutely does, because there's a human that is responsible for, when we go back to what we talked about, reducing risk and making sure that we're compliant. And we talked about that tension that caused. So when we think about it from their perspective of how I don't want to mess things up, I need to make sure that we don't go to jail, I'm spending taxpayer money well. It really does. When you think about it from that perspective, then I think that would be, I mean, it goes to the transformative mindset that we talked about then.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay, now we're looking on to episode 7, which was Kassie. You joined us on that one, as well as Melissa Murphy, also from Public Knowledge. And what we talked about there was strengthening decision making in uncertain times or uncertain environments through data driven, evidence based practices. And Will, I'm wondering kind of what resonated for you from their approach to decision making.
The framing of decision making around, balancing data, collaboration, and like values, and having that driving, particularly like in the uncertain times that we've been talking about throughout this podcast. I think and I also appreciated discussion about decisions not being made in isolation, and thinking about, and this goes back to some of the things we've been talking about in the other episodes, when you're really taking a collaborative approach, then thinking about what that does around building legitimacy, building support for the decision, being able to move forward. That's kind of what stood out to me.
Kassie, what do you think is most relevant for our clients today about that episode?
Well, we've been talking all day today about the power of inviting the voices of the end user. We just talked about it on the last one too. And this is incredibly relevant here. Really what I think the bold letters, all caps, underline and circle, the takeaway is the importance of developing the consistent, repeatable, future-proof processes for making decisions. And it's not about like how you make that decision, it's about how you go about making all decisions. And it's really the capacity to make those decision after decision after decision in a fast moving environment. And that will build those muscles for your agency leaders all the way down to kind of modeling for your frontline worker or your analysts, kind of first person, it's their first job, down to this is how we make decisions. It also occurs to me when I'm thinking about this that in addition to the decision matrix that we use and we talked about in this episode, is that it's also, and this is kind of something that I walked away with that I want to bring to our internal firm, which is that we go through all these types of decisions, and we probably need to really modify some criteria for what we do around different decisions that fall within certain buckets, right? Because you don't need to do a full-blown alternatives analysis to paint your wall. I mean, some people do, but is that really time effective? No. But when I thought about it, like our IT service ticket, which I've had the pleasure of being able to submit in the last couple of days, but it's a really great model, right? We have to categorize the impact and the urgency, right? And that actually is a trigger for how our IT department interacts with us and what they do. So I think that we probably will want to, in the coming year, come up with a similar matrix, not who's making the decision and what input they're getting, but also what level of effort do we go about to collect additional data based on criteria of the decision. And I think that's another really great introduction for continual improvement for us to keep nimble.
Well, and I'm going to jump around on us. I'm going to jump to episode 9 and then come back to episode 8, just because you're hitting on with decision making, Kassie. I think it's all about leaders and teams, right? It's really about the people and their ability to do that work and their ability to do that together. And part of that is built into that process, right? Because if we know it's a low risk, low impact decision, then yeah, one person can make it with very minimal input. But if it's a high risk, high impact, high, hard decision to make, then yeah, it might be a team consensus where we force everyone to come together, right, into that decision. But so much of that kind of logistical, which seems very, I'm going to say, like systematic, right, about decision making is really all comes back to leadership and people and healthy teams, which is what we covered in episode 9 with Carla West from North Carolina DHHS and Tracy Malone from our PK team. And we really talked about how we can have purpose-driven leadership and our impact leadership framework for building strong adaptive teams during change, which a piece of that is decision making, right? Ultimately, that's the goal, is how do you make great decisions together? And so, Kassie, what kind of theme from that episode and from Carla and Tracy resonated with you?
Well, I love this episode because they really touched on one of the things that I'm working hardest to build consistency in my leadership itself, which is really around really leaning into kind of the things that you hear and the opinions and those other pieces of information that the rest of the team brings in, right? So we'll also, where the dissension is, and really leaning into that because there's a great amount of learning in that. And it's so funny because actually, as I'm saying it right now, is that, courage and risk taking is something that is not as difficult for me. I have a pretty, is it a high risk threshold? Anyway, I love change. So, I get pretty excited about this. And so if I fail, I'm not afraid to fail because I know I trust in myself and I have confidence in my team, right? And us, it's not just me, but like I have confidence that we can recover and jump on and keep moving forward. So I mean, I'm really comfortable in that. But it's when you have this someone who a dissenting opinion, even if it's someone that's the same, like mirrors my courage around risk and not afraid to fail. But if they are completely wildly opposite on the opinion of what that looks like, is really like having that empathetic nature about, okay, well, I really see how that is, rather than it being like conflict in a negative way, that it is a positive way, and really cultivating that is really, I'm with Will. It's hard. That's really hard for me. And not that I don't want to be surrounding myself with a bunch of people who just yes people and say, yeah, I agree with you. That's harder too. And especially like even when the three of us agree, we need to go out and we do this and say, okay, are we right? Because it's not about being right. We don't want to be right. We want to make a good decision.
Will, how do you think Carla's approach kind of reflects what effective leaders do today that you see across the field?
I love how bringing things back. So through our discussion today, we've talked about, working in times of uncertainty. So really trying to ground decisions in the shared purpose of what we're working towards, having values that we're trying to hold close to and really embody. That's one of the things that I love about working public knowledge is that we have the PK way, we have the values that are important to us, and in those hard times, it is very helpful to go back and look at this and think about it and think about what does this mean in relation to this hard set of circumstances that this decision is being made about. So I think the focus on that and trying to do that in a regular way is hugely important. The other thing out of this episode is just around communication. The importance of that to build confidence, the importance of that to address resistance, the importance of that. Kassie, like making the decision is one thing, but then communicating about it and trying to step it through and implement it is its own set of challenges.
Yeah, saying it enough times and getting other people to start saying it for you.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go back to episode 8. This was a really fun episode as well. I got to record this in Mississippi with Bridget Bell, who's at Mississippi DCPS, and Doug Swisher from Public Knowledge, who does our human services financing work. And this one was really about strategies around funding for government agencies that align their dollars with their goals and it's specifically for Bridget that support prevention and drive meaningful community outcomes. And Will, I'm curious what stood out for you about shifting funding towards impact.
It's interesting to get the chance to look at like the full season of the podcast. And I'm loving the some of the shared themes.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to this, it made me think about your conversation with Dustin from the standpoint of, the difference between compliance and the thought of like really focusing on where are these dollars going and what are they resulting in, and that being driven by what is the most important to the firm and how's that going to be measured, and then how are we looking at how that's being funded. So like the strategic nature of that,
Yeah, strategy instead of compliance. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
it just kind of, I thought this is beautiful because some of that earlier procurement work, and then this is talking about, all right, funding these efforts as we're moving forward.
Well, in some ways, we talked about that with the systems work too, right, Kassie, and like decision making, right? How do you focus more on strategy rather than day to day or compliance or, that ultimate decision? So it is a good theme throughout.
It's exhausting that way too.
Yeah.
Sorry, Will.
Yeah. The other thing about this episode that I found intriguing was hearing both Bridget and Doug talk about the importance for, financial officers to really kind of understand what the work is, what they're trying to achieve, and then how that plays out in the decisions that are being made around managing a budget or moving forward with that. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, again, back to that human centered approach, right? How do you focus on the ultimate person or people that you're impacting and what's that impact? Yeah. Even when it comes to just the dollars and the accounting of the dollars. So, yeah, I love it. Kassie, was there anything that you heard from Bridget or Doug that you thought was like, wow, this is really actionable, or what was kind of the most actionable thing that you heard?
I'm actually not going to answer that question, but what I am going to answer.
Sure not. Which is why I love working with you. Keep going.
But what I want to answer is which approach has the best long-term benefits.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I really think, again, this has actually been the theme of the season, both indirectly and directly, not about the change, but about leadership, it was their leadership and cultural approach around normalizing the culture of curiosity and asking questions and pairing that with supporting the resilience. And I believe it was Bridget, I'm hoping it was Bridget, that said the CAPE acronym, which is everybody put on your CAPE, which is compassion, accountability, professionalism, and excellence. And I feel like those actions, they do take care in feeding. And that's why I didn't say it's the most actionable, because it does take a lot of work. But I believe that that investment is really where the biggest payoff is going to be, just in terms of being able to fund the impact and really do the things that you want to do. And so, but then to answer your question, I will, which is I think the most actionable place is about the performance-based contracting and implementing those contracts that are really tied to clear and measurable outcomes. That's going to drive vendor performance and accountability. And I think, that's not easy as well, but it is the most actionable piece.
It's so actionable and it's so needed. And I wish all of our clients would head there, right? In every industry that we work in, it doesn't matter what they're paying for. If we could get them all to start moving towards that, just that would be such a huge change, right? In all those industries.
Yeah. And it's hard. This also takes courage too, because it is, I won't call out a state, but there has been a state that had a whole provider network that was not delivering. And I know that they had some traditional mechanisms that were put in place that were punitive. And I know there's nothing, this is one of those failures that has extreme lessons learned, that there's no real finger pointing around it. It's just an unfortunate case. But had there been some additional ways that they had structured this incentive, not even incentive, but the actual payment, I believe that the state would have had a lot more, a larger arsenal to be able to
levers to pull.
Yeah, levers to pull before they actually got as far as they had to, where, bad things were happening.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, that was our season. Thank you guys. That was really fun to kind of walk through, meander through kind of where we've been and where we've come. I just have one last question for you, which is kind of looking ahead to what's coming and what we're going to need going into the next year, into 2026, and kind of what that means for organizations. And so my question is, and either of you can start, where should organizations invest to be ready for whatever is coming next, what that next wave of changes?
I have a long answer. So and we're running out of time. So I'll just keep it short, which is I think really the key is building the organization resilience capacity, because that there's no one thing. There are a lot of things that we've talked about that are really kind of tactics that can come into play. But I think without those tactics, again, it's put in the framework together for decision making that is consistent and repeatable. It's, embedding, you build that capacity, so you strengthen skills around it. You embed resilience into the leadership team so that you're aligning those teams around the goals and creating clarity, encouraging people to, how to interact with authenticity, but also while regulating emotions and staying present, and then fostering trust within teams, which we've talked about all of this and throughout the season. But then it's really then kind of taking all of that and then not only, creating this is a need, this is where your skill set's going to be, but then also building those systems that help implement that resilience and expecting that resilience too. I guess it was shorter than I thought.
Yeah, no, I love it. Invest in resilience. I love it.
Yes.
Will?
I'll add to that just in terms of thinking about, are there approaches to ensure that diverse voices are being heard in the process? Do you have a means where you're getting quantitative and qualitative data to inform the decisions that are being made? And just, do you have a robust, collaborative approach to making decisions where it makes sense and people understand where they fit into that? I think, thinking about the next wave of change and like being able to do that better and be more resilient as Cassie's started this discussion.
Decision making and resilience. Honestly, that's such a key part of how you react to and mitigate change, right? So it's great. And it's great advice for us as we also get into the new year as well.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you both for your insights and helping me close out the 2025 season. It was great to be able to close it out with the two of you. It's been a privilege to be here with you today, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time.